The distant boom of gunfire echoed over the vast prairie as Zarah Campbell gathered what little she could carry, the flames of her family's homestead already licking at the night sky behind her. There was no time for tears, no time to mourn what she'd lost, only time to run before the men who'd murdered her father returned to claim her too. Kansas Territory, 1858. The bleeding Kansas conflict had turned neighbor against neighbor, pro-slavery forces against free staters, and Zarah's family had chosen the wrong side according to the masked men who'd raided their home. Her father's only crime had been speaking out against slavery at a town meeting the previous Sunday. Now he was dead, her mother 8 months in the grave from fever, and 19-year-old Zarah was alone in the world with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket around her neck. The prairie stretched before her like an ocean, tall grasses swaying in the midnight breeze. Stars glittered overhead, indifferent to her plight as she stumbled forward, her thin boots already rubbing blisters on her heels. She had no plan beyond putting distance between herself and the smoking ruins of her life. By dawn, Zarah's legs trembled with each step. Her throat burned with thirst and her stomach gnawed with hunger. The small bundle of possessions, a change of clothes, a water skin now nearly empty, and a daguerreotype of her parents weighed heavily in her arms. The vast emptiness of the prairie, once so beautiful to her, now seemed a terrifying expanse offering no shelter, no comfort, no hope. The sun climbed mercilessly overhead, beating down upon her uncovered head. Her dark blonde hair, falling loose from its pins, clung to her sweat-dampened neck. Still, she pressed on, following the vague direction of west, where she'd heard tell of new settlements, new beginnings. Perhaps there she could start again if she survived the journey. It was the dust cloud on the horizon that first caught her attention, riders coming fast. Terror seized her heart. Had they found her trail? Were they coming to finish what they'd started? Zarah looked around desperately, but the prairie offered no place to hide. She was exposed, vulnerable. The riders drew closer, and Zarah could make out a single figure now, not the band of murderers she'd feared, but a lone horseman. Still, she stood frozen, uncertain whether to run or stand her ground. Her options were few, exhausted as she was, outrunning a horse was impossible. The rider slowed as he approached, and Zarah got her first clear look at him. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat easy in the saddle of a magnificent chestnut horse. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see he was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with a strong jaw darkened by several days' growth of beard. "Madam," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "You all right?" Zarah didn't answer, couldn't find her voice. Who was this man, friend or foe? In these troubled times, a stranger could mean salvation or destruction. He dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his distance as if sensing her fear. "Name's Griffin Wade," he said, pushing his hat back to reveal kind hazel eyes. "I don't mean to frighten you, but a lady alone on the prairie, well, it ain't safe." "I'm quite aware," Zarah finally found her voice, though it emerged raspy from thirst. "Please, I've done nothing wrong, I'm just trying to get west." Griffin Wade studied her with a thoughtful expression, taking in her disheveled appearance, the soot still smudging her face and clothes. "Running from something, I take it." It wasn't a question, and Zarah didn't treat it as one. She lifted her chin, summoning what dignity she could. "My path is my own concern, Mr. Wade." A slight smile touched his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Fair enough." He reached for a canteen hanging from his saddle. "At least take some water. You look about ready to drop." Thirst overrode caution, and Zarah accepted the canteen with trembling hands. The water was warm but clean, and she had to force herself not to gulp it all down at once. "Where you headed exactly?" Griffin asked, watching her drink. Zarah lowered the canteen, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "West," she repeated. "Beyond that, I'm not certain." "West covers a lot of territory," he observed, "and it's a hard journey for a woman alone." "I haven't much choice," Zarah replied, handing back the canteen. "Thank you for the water, Mr. Wade. I should continue on. In this heat, without supplies." Griffin shook his head. "My ranch is a half-day's ride from here." "I can offer you a proper meal, safe shelter for the night, and supplies to continue your journey if that's what you want." Zarah hesitated. Every instinct warned against trusting a stranger, yet the alternative was continuing alone without food or water until she collapsed from exhaustion. "Why would you help me?" she asked suspiciously. Griffin's expression grew serious. "Because my mother taught me to help those in need, and if you don't mind my saying so, you look like you're in need." He paused. "I'm heading back to my ranch now. You're welcome to ride with me, no strings attached, or you can continue on your own. Your choice." He didn't pressure her, simply stood waiting, giving her space to decide. There was something in his eyes, a steadiness that spoke of reliability. "I'm Zarah Campbell," she finally said. "And I would be grateful for your help, at least for tonight." Griffin nodded, seeming pleased with her decision. "Miss Campbell, it would be my honor." He led his horse closer. "Can you ride?" "Yes, my father taught me." "Good." He cupped his hands to give her a boost up. "We'll ride double until we reach my place." Zarah hesitated only briefly before placing her foot in his hands and allowing him to lift her onto the horse's back. Griffin swung up behind her a moment later, his solid presence at her back both reassuring and unsettling. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been this close to a man who wasn't her father. "Hold on," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. As the horse began to move beneath them, Zarah fought to keep her eyes open. The rhythmic motion, combined with her exhaustion, made staying awake nearly impossible. Before long, her head drooped, and she found herself leaning back against Griffin's chest, unable to maintain her rigid posture. "Rest," he said softly, his breath warm against her ear. "I've got you." Something in those simple words broke through Zarah's defenses. For the first time since watching her father fall, she allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. She had no reason to trust this stranger, this Griffin Wade, but in the vastness of the prairie, he'd offered her something she desperately needed: hope. As consciousness slipped away, Zarah heard him speak again, his voice a low rumble she felt more than heard. "I promise, Miss Campbell, you're safe now." It was a promise she desperately wanted to believe. Zarah awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar motion beneath her. The sun had shifted in the sky, and her body ached from the awkward position. Griffin's arm remained steady around her waist, keeping her secure on the horse. "Welcome back," he said, a smile in his voice. "You've been asleep for a couple hours." Embarrassment heated Zarah's cheeks. "I apologize. I didn't mean to." "No need for apologies," Griffin interrupted gently. "Looked like you needed the rest." Zarah straightened, trying to put some proper distance between them despite their shared saddle. "How much farther to your ranch?" "We're nearly there. See that line of trees ahead? That marks Buffalo Creek, which runs through my property." Zarah squinted against the late afternoon sunlight. Indeed, a dark line of trees broke the monotony of the prairie horizon, promising water and shade. As they drew closer, she began to make out other details: a split-rail fence, grazing cattle, and eventually the outline of buildings. Griffin's ranch was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy two-story house constructed of timber and stone formed the centerpiece, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings arranged nearby. Smoke curled from the chimney, and Zarah's stomach rumbled at the thought of a hot meal. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, older, with steel-gray hair and a weathered face. He raised a hand in greeting. "That's Hank," Griffin explained. "Been with me since I started this place. Good man." Hank watched curiously as Griffin helped Zarah dismount. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, stiff from the long ride and her earlier exertions. "Griffin?" Hank called questioningly, approaching with a measured stride. "Hank, this is Miss Zarah Campbell. She'll be our guest tonight," Griffin said, his tone brooking no argument. "Miss Campbell, this is Hank Dawson, my foreman and right hand." Zarah straightened her spine, conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Dawson." Hank touched the brim of his hat respectfully, but his eyes were shrewd as they flicked from her to Griffin. "Miss Campbell." "Welcome to Willow Creek Ranch. Is Maggie inside?" Griffin asked, handing the reins of his horse to Hank. "Yes, sir, preparing supper as we speak." Griffin nodded. "Good, Miss Campbell could use a hot meal and a chance to refresh herself." He turned to Zarah. "Maggie's our housekeeper. She'll help you get settled." Zarah followed Griffin to the house. acutely aware of the dirt on her face, the tear in her skirt, the general state of disarray that must make her look like a vagrant. The front door opened into a surprisingly comfortable parlor, simply but tastefully furnished with solid wooden pieces and colorful hand-woven rugs. A plump, middle-aged woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands appeared from what must be the kitchen, her expression shifting from welcome to concern as she took in Zarah's appearance. "Gracious heavens," she exclaimed. "What happened to you, child?" "Maggie, this is Miss Campbell," Griffin interjected. "She's had a difficult journey. Could you help her get cleaned up before supper?" "Of course," Maggie replied, already moving toward Zarah with motherly efficiency. "Come with me, dear. We'll have you feeling human again in no time." Zarah cast a grateful look toward Griffin, who nodded encouragingly. "Take your time. Supper won't be ready for an hour yet." Maggie led Zarah upstairs to a small but clean bedroom with a washstand already prepared. "I'll bring up hot water," she said, "and find you something clean to wear. You look about my niece's size. She left some things last time she visited." Before Zarah could properly thank her, Maggie had bustled out, returning minutes later with steaming water and a simple but clean dress of blue calico. Mr. Wade didn't explain. Maggie began tentatively as she helped Zarah out of her soiled clothing. "No, I imagine he didn't," Zarah replied softly. Then, feeling she owed this kind woman some explanation, added, "My home was attacked last night. My father was killed. I ran." Maggie's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, you poor child." She crossed herself quickly. "These are terrible times we live in. Was it the border troubles?" Zarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak further on the matter. The kindness of these strangers threatened to unravel the tight control she maintained over her emotions. "Well, you're safe here," Maggie assured her, pouring warm water into the basin. "Griffin Wade is a good man, stands for what's right, but stays out of the politics that's tearing Kansas apart." As Zarah washed away the dirt and soot, letting Maggie help her comb through her tangled hair, she found herself wondering about the cowboy who'd rescued her. What kind of man was Griffin Wade, really? And could she truly trust him? By the time Zarah descended the stairs, feeling remarkably refreshed in the borrowed dress with her hair neatly braided, savory aromas filled the house. Griffin stood when she entered the dining room, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "Miss Campbell," he finally said, "you look much recovered." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy under his appreciative gaze, "and thank you for the use of the dress. It's very kind." "Belongs to my niece," Maggie called from the kitchen, "but it suits you better if you don't mind my saying so." Dinner was simple but abundant: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and stewed apples for dessert. Zarah hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was before her, and she had to remind herself to eat slowly with proper manners, despite her body's demands. Griffin and Hank discussed ranch matters as they ate, occasionally including Zarah in their conversation, but never pressing her for details about her situation. It was only after Maggie had cleared the dishes and brought coffee that Griffin finally addressed the subject. "Miss Campbell," he began, his voice gentle, "I won't ask you to share anything you don't wish to, but if there's something I should know, if there are men who might come looking for you, I need to be prepared." Zarah's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "The men who attacked our farm. They were border ruffians, pro-slavery men from Missouri. My father spoke out against slavery at a town meeting last week." She swallowed hard. "They shot him on our front porch and burned our home. I hid in the root cellar until they left, then I ran." Griffin's expression darkened. "Did you recognize any of them?" "They wore masks, but I would know their voices." Zarah looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "I have nowhere to go, Mr. Wade. My mother died last winter. We have no other family nearby. I was heading west because I heard there are new settlements where a woman might find work as a teacher or seamstress." "You're educated then?" Griffin asked. "My mother was a school teacher before she married my father. She taught me well." Zarah straightened her shoulders. "I can read and write cipher, and I know my history and geography. I can also sew, cook, and manage a household." Griffin nodded thoughtfully. "Those are valuable skills, Miss Campbell." "I don't want charity," Zarah said firmly. "I'll work for my keep while I'm here and then move on once I've earned enough for proper supplies." A small smile played at the corners of Griffin's mouth. I admire your independence, but there's no rush for you to leave. Stay as long as you need to recover your strength and make proper plans. I couldn't impose, it's no imposition, Griffin assured her. In fact, he hesitated, then continued, Maggie's been complaining that the house is too much for her to manage alone, especially with spring roundup coming. We could use an extra pair of hands if you're willing. Zarah recognized the offer for what it was, a way for her to maintain her dignity while accepting help. I would be grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Wade. Griffin, he corrected. If you're staying on, you might as well use my given name. Griffin, Zarah repeated, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. And you must call me Zarah. Later that night, lying in a real bed for the first time in what felt like ages, Zarah stared at the ceiling, her mind racing despite her physical exhaustion. The events of the past 2 days seemed unreal: the attack, her flight across the prairie, and now this unexpected sanctuary. Griffin Wade was an enigma. A cattle rancher on the Kansas frontier, educated enough to speak well, prosperous enough to own a substantial spread, yet unmarried at what she guessed to be 25 or 26. He'd shown her nothing but kindness, but Zarah had learned the hard way that men were not always what they seemed. Still, as sleep finally claimed her, Zarah found herself feeling something she'd thought lost forever in the flames of her childhood home: hope. The following days established a routine that gave Zarah a welcome sense of normalcy. She rose early, helping Maggie prepare breakfast for the ranch hands before turning to household tasks: mending, cleaning, and learning to manage the larger house. Griffin was often gone from dawn until dusk, busy with the demands of the ranch, but each evening he would return, wash up, and join her and the others for supper. Those evening meals became something Zarah looked forward to with surprising eagerness. Griffin proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist, well-read despite the frontier setting. He'd been to Boston and New York in his youth, and his descriptions of the bustling cities fascinated Zarah, who had never traveled beyond Kansas territory. How did you end up here? She asked him one evening as they sat on the front porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and purple. So far from civilization, Griffin smiled at that. Is that what you think, that we're far from civilization, aren't we? Zarah gestured at the vast emptiness surrounding them. The nearest town is a day's ride away. True, Griffin conceded, but civilization isn't just about proximity to other people. It's about how we treat one another, the communities we build. He looked out over his land. My father was a merchant in St. Louis, expected me to follow in his footsteps, but I always wanted space, freedom, so you came west. So I came west, he agreed. Started with nothing but determination and a bit of money saved from working on riverboats, built this place up over 5 years. Zarah studied his profile in the fading light. You've accomplished a great deal in a short time. Griffin turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. What about you, Zarah? What did you dream of before everything changed? The question caught her off guard. In the chaos of recent events, she'd scarcely had time to remember the young woman she'd been, with hopes and plans of her own. I wanted to be a teacher, she admitted. Like my mother, maybe have my own school someday. That's still possible, Griffin said softly. Perhaps, Zarah replied, though she wondered if anything from her old life was still possible. The girl who dreamed of teaching in a little schoolhouse seemed to belong to another lifetime. As April turned to May, the prairie burst into vibrant life. Wildflowers carpeted the rolling hills, and the days grew warmer. Zarah's nightmares filled with flames and gunshots became less frequent, though they never disappeared entirely. She began accompanying Maggie to gather wild herbs and berries, learning which plants were useful for medicine or cooking. On one such expedition, they encountered a rattlesnake sunning itself on a rock. Before Zarah could even cry out in alarm, Maggie had dispatched it with a well-aimed blow from her walking stick. My goodness, Zarah exclaimed, heart pounding. You're remarkably brave, Maggie, the older woman laughed. Not brave, child, just been out here long enough to know what needs doing. She gave Zarah a measuring look. You'll learn too, this country makes you strong or breaks you. I'm not sure I'll be here long enough to find out, Zarah said, helping Maggie gather the herbs they'd come for. Oh, Maggie raised an eyebrow. Still planning to move on, are you? I can't stay indefinitely, Zarah pointed out. I'm grateful for Mr. Wade's for Griffin's hospitality, but I need to make my own way. Maggie snorted softly. That young man looks at you like you hung the moon and you're talking about leaving. Heat rushed to Zarah's cheeks. He's simply being kind, Maggie repeated with a knowing smile. Is that what they're calling it these days? Despite her embarrassment, Zarah couldn't help wondering if there was truth to Maggie's words. She'd caught Griffin watching her sometimes, a look in his eyes she couldn't quite decipher. And if she were honest with herself, she'd been watching him too, admiring his strength as he worked with the horses, the gentle way he spoke to the young calves, the quiet authority he commanded among his men. But romance was a luxury Zarah couldn't afford, not when her future remained so uncertain. The men who'd killed her father might still be looking for her. The political situation in Kansas grew more volatile by the day, and Griffin Wade, for all his kindness, remained something of a mystery. That evening, as they sat down to supper, Griffin announced news that sent a chill through Zarah's newfound sense of security. I need to ride into Lawrence tomorrow, he said, serving himself a portion of Maggie's stew. We're running low on supplies, and there are some business matters I need to attend to. Lawrence, Zarah repeated, her voice catching. Lawrence was the nearest substantial town, a known Free State stronghold, and the very place her father had spoken out against slavery. Griffin must have noticed her distress, for his expression softened. I'll be careful, Zarah. The situation there is tense, but not dangerous for someone who keeps his political opinions to himself. When will you return? She asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Should be back by nightfall the day after tomorrow, Griffin replied. Hank will be here, in the other hands you'll be safe. Zarah nodded, though worry gnawed at her. What if Griffin encountered the men who'd killed her father? What if someone recognized her name and connected her to the murdered Free Stater? What if Griffin himself held pro-slavery views he'd simply been too polite to express? That night, Zarah found sleep elusive. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were troubled visions of Griffin confronting masked riders, of flames consuming Willow Creek Ranch as they had her family's homestead. She woke before dawn, resolved to speak with Griffin before he departed. Finding her shawl in the darkness, she made her way downstairs, guided by the faint light coming from the kitchen. Griffin was already there, drinking coffee as Maggie packed provisions for his journey. He looked up in surprise when Zarah entered. You're up early, he observed. I wanted to catch you before you left, Zarah replied, accepting the cup of coffee Maggie silently offered. May I speak with you privately? Griffin nodded, rising from the table. Let's step outside. The pre-dawn air was cool, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten. Griffin led her to the edge of the porch, away from the kitchen windows. What's troubling you? He asked quietly. Zarah took a deep breath. Before you go to Lawrence, there's something you should know. My father, Daniel Campbell, was killed for speaking against slavery. The men who murdered him might still be looking for me as a witness. She looked up at him, searching his face. I don't know your views on slavery, Griffin. I've been afraid to ask. Griffin's expression grew solemn. You've been worried I might share the views of the men who killed your father. It wasn't a question, but Zarah nodded anyway. These are divided times, I couldn't be certain. Zarah, Griffin said, his voice low and intense, I believe slavery is an abomination before God and man. I've never owned slaves, nor will I ever. But I've also seen how this issue is tearing our country apart, turning neighbor against neighbor. He ran a hand through his hair. That's why I've tried to keep Willow Creek neutral ground, a place apart from the conflict. Relief washed over Zarah, followed quickly by shame at having doubted him. I'm sorry, I should have trusted you. No, Griffin said firmly. You were right to be cautious. Trust must be earned. He paused. Would you like me to inquire about your father's murderers while I'm in Lawrence? Discreetly, of course. Zarah considered this. Part of her desperately wanted justice for her father, but another part feared what might happen if those men discovered her whereabouts. I don't know, she admitted. I want them to answer for what they did, but I'm afraid of bringing trouble to your door. Griffin reached out, hesitating briefly before taking her hand in his. "Whatever you decide, know this: you have a home here for as long as you want it. I will protect you, Zarah Campbell, with everything I have." The intensity in his eyes made Zarah's breath catch. For a moment she thought he might kiss her and was surprised to realize how much she wanted him to. But Griffin simply squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "I should finish preparing," he said. "Think about what you want me to do in Lawrence. Let me know before I leave." As he turned to go, Zarah called after him. "Griffin," he paused, looking back at her. "Be careful," she said softly. "Please." A smile touched his lips. "I will. I have a powerful reason to return safely." The 2 days of Griffin's absence stretched interminably. Zarah threw herself into her work, helping Maggie with spring cleaning and even assisting Hank with tending to a newborn calf whose mother had rejected it. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from her worries, but as the second day waned with no sign of Griffin, anxiety tightened its grip. "He'll be back," Maggie assured her as they prepared supper. "Griffin Wade is a man of his word. What if something happened?" Zarah couldn't help asking. "The roads aren't safe, especially for someone known to be prosperous." "That boy can handle himself," Maggie replied confidently. "Been doing it since he was 16. Zarah wanted to believe her, but as darkness fell and still Griffin did not appear, her fears multiplied. Had he encountered trouble on the road? Had her enemies found him? Or worse, had he learned something in Lawrence that changed his opinion of her? She sat on the porch long after Maggie had gone to bed, straining to hear hoofbeats in the distance. The prairie night was alive with sounds: the chirping of crickets, the occasional howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through grass, but no approaching rider. Finally, exhaustion overcame vigilance, and Zarah dozed in the porch chair, wrapped in a quilt against the night chill. She woke with a start at the sound of a horse approaching, the sky just beginning to lighten with false dawn. Griffin dismounted wearily, leading his horse toward the barn. In the dim light, Zarah could see that his clothes were dusty from the road, his shoulders slumped with fatigue. "Griffin," she called, rising to her feet. He turned, surprise evident even in the pre-dawn gloom. "Zarah, what are you doing out here?" "Waiting for you," she admitted, hurrying down the porch steps. "You said you'd be back by nightfall." "Got delayed," Griffin explained, his voice rough with tiredness. "There was trouble in Lawrence. A Southern congressman was attacked by a Free State man. People are taking sides, tensions running high." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I didn't want to ride at night with the roads so dangerous, so I stayed an extra night in town." Relief that he was safe mingled with renewed worry about the escalating conflict. Did you learn anything about my father's killers?" Griffin sighed. "Not as much as I'd hoped, but I did hear rumors of a group of border ruffians operating in the area where your farm was located. They've been attacking Free State homesteads, driving people off their land." "For what purpose?" Zarah asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "To ensure Kansas enters the Union as a slave state," Griffin replied grimly. "They want to drive out anyone who opposes slavery." Zarah hugged herself against a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the pre-dawn air. "Then I can never go back." "No," Griffin agreed softly. "I don't think you can." He hesitated, then added, "But that doesn't mean you can't move forward." There was something in his voice, a note of meaning beyond the simple words, that made Zarah look up sharply. "What do you mean?" Griffin glanced toward the barn. "Let me see to my horse first. We'll talk after." Zarah nodded, returning to the porch to wait. The eastern sky was brightening now, promising another clear spring day. By the time Griffin emerged from the barn, the first golden rays of sunlight were stretching across the prairie. He joined her on the porch, looking more composed but still weary. "You must be exhausted," Zarah said. "We can talk later after you've rested." Griffin shook his head. "This won't wait." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you something from Lawrence." Curious, Zarah accepted the package and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a book, a collected volume of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Her fingers traced the embossed leather cover in wonder. "How did you know?" she asked, looking up at him in astonishment. "Poetry was my mother's passion. She taught me to love it too." A smile curved Griffin's lips. "You mentioned it once when we were discussing books. You said your mother read poetry to you every night." I can't believe you remembered such a small detail, Zarah murmured, deeply touched. I remember everything about you, Zarah, Griffin said quietly. Everything you've told me, everything I've observed. He took a deep breath. These past weeks, having you here at Willow Creek, have shown me what was missing in my life. Before you came, I was content enough, building my ranch, making my way, but now. Zarah's heart began to race as Griffin took her hands in his, the book of poetry cradled between them. I know it's soon, he continued, his voice low and earnest. I know you're still healing from all you've lost, but I can't let you leave without telling you how I feel. His hazel eyes held hers, unflinching. I've fallen in love with you, Zarah Campbell. Your courage, your intelligence, your gentle spirit, everything about you calls to me. Zarah couldn't speak, couldn't find words to express the tumult of emotions his declaration evoked. I'm not asking for an answer now, Griffin added hastily. Only that you consider staying, not just as an employee or a guest, but as someone who might someday share my life completely. He squeezed her hands gently. I promise you this, whatever you decide, you will always have a home at Willow Creek, and I will always protect you for as long as I live. Tears blurred Zarah's vision. No one had spoken to her with such tenderness since her parents died. No one had offered her not just safety but a future. Griffin, she began, her voice trembling, I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, he replied. That's all I ask for now. I will, Zarah promised. I will think about it. Griffin smiled, the weariness seemed to fall away from him. Good. He released her hands reluctantly. Now I should get some sleep before the day's work begins. As he turned to go, Zarah found her voice again. Griffin. He paused, looking back at her. Thank you, she said softly. Not just for the book, but for everything. For finding me on the prairie when I had nothing. For bringing me here, for giving me hope again. Griffin's expression softened. You don't need to thank me for that, Zarah. Having you here has been my privilege. After he'd gone inside, Zarah remained on the porch, clutching the book of poetry to her chest as the sun rose fully over the prairie. Her mind whirled with Griffin's declaration, with possibilities she'd never dared to consider. Could she build a new life here? Could she trust in the promise of happiness with this man who'd rescued her from desolation? Or was she simply clinging to the first safe harbor she'd found after the storm that destroyed her old life? Zarah didn't have answers yet, but as she watched the morning light transform the prairie, she felt something unfurling within her, a cautious, fragile hope that perhaps her flight across the prairie had led her not just to temporary sanctuary, but to the place she truly belonged. The following days brought a subtle shift in the atmosphere at Willow Creek Ranch. Nothing was overtly different. Griffin was still unfailingly respectful, never pressing Zarah for an answer to his unspoken question, but there was a new awareness between them, charged with possibility. Zarah found herself noticing things she'd overlooked before. The way Griffin's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands as he worked, the deep timbre of his voice when he spoke her name. She caught him watching her too, his gaze quickly averted when she looked his way, a hint of color rising in his tanned cheeks. Maggie observed these developments with knowing eyes but kept her comments to herself, though Zarah sometimes caught her hiding a smile when Griffin found excuses to linger in the kitchen, or when Zarah volunteered to bring him lunch in the fields. Spring roundup kept Griffin busy from dawn until dusk, but he always made time to speak with Zarah at day's end, often inviting her to walk with him as he made a final check of the property before nightfall. During these walks, they talked of many things: his plans for the ranch, her memories of her parents, books they'd both read, dreams they'd harbored. Did you always want to raise cattle? Zarah asked one evening as they strolled along Buffalo Creek, the water reflecting the golden light of sunset. Griffin shook his head. Truth be told, I wasn't sure what I wanted, only that I needed space to breathe. St. Louis was too confined, too set in its ways. He picked up a stone and skipped it across the creek's surface. My father had my life all planned out: take over the family business, marry the daughter of his business partner, live in a fine house in the right neighborhood. And that didn't appeal to you, Zarah prompted when he fell silent. The business might have eventually, Griffin admitted. But the marriage, he glanced at her. Caroline Winters was a lovely young woman by all accounts, but we'd met exactly twice at formal dinners. The idea of building a life with a stranger based on business considerations seemed wrong to me, so you came west instead. So I came west, Griffin agreed. Much to my father's disappointment, we haven't spoken in 3 years. Zarah studied his profile, seeing the mixture of determination and regret. Do you ever think of reconciling? Griffin sighed. Often, but my father is a proud man. He sees my choice as a rejection of everything he worked for. He looked out across the creek. Perhaps someday he'll understand that I needed to make my own way, not follow a path laid out for me. I hope so, Zarah said softly. Family is precious. I would give anything to have my parents back. Griffin turned to her, his expression compassionate. I'm sorry, Zarah, that was thoughtless of me. No, she assured him. It wasn't. Your situation is different. Your father is still alive. There's still hope for reconciliation. They continued walking in companionable silence until they reached a bend in the creek where a massive cottonwood tree spread its branches wide. Griffin paused, gesturing to the tree. This is my favorite spot on the property, he said. I sometimes come here to think. Zarah could see why. The view was spectacular, rolling prairie stretching to the horizon, the creek winding like a silver ribbon through the landscape, and the distant outlines of the ranch buildings nestled in the valley. It's beautiful, she murmured, I've thought. Griffin began, then hesitated. I've thought this would be a good place for a house someday. A real house, not just a ranch headquarters. Zarah glanced at him curiously. You don't consider your current house real? Griffin smiled. It's functional, but I've always envisioned something more permanent. Something built to last generations. He looked directly at her. Something worth passing on to children. The implication wasn't lost on Zarah, and warmth flooded her cheeks. It would be a wonderful place to raise a family, she agreed softly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Griffin reached for her hand. His touch was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Zarah laced her fingers with his, her heart fluttering at the simple contact. They stood together, watching the sunset in silence, until the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. When they finally turned back toward the ranch, Griffin kept hold of her hand, and Zarah made no move to reclaim it. That night, as Zarah prepared for bed, she found herself thinking not of the past and its sorrows, but of the future and its possibilities. The face that appeared in those imaginings was Griffin's, his hazel eyes warm with love, his strong hands building a life they would share. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Was she truly falling in love with Griffin Wade, or was she simply grateful to the man who'd rescued her? Could she trust these feelings, born in the aftermath of tragedy? As May turned to June, these questions continued to occupy Zarah's thoughts. She found herself turning to Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poetry, finding comfort and insight in the beautifully crafted verses. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways, she read one afternoon, sitting beneath the shade of an apple tree in the small orchard behind the house. A fine poem, came Griffin's voice, startling her from her reverie. Zarah looked up to find him standing a few feet away, hat in hand. I didn't hear you approach. I didn't mean to intrude, he said. I saw you from the barn and thought you might like some company, but if you prefer solitude. No, Zarah said quickly, closing the book. Please join me. Griffin settled beside her on the grass, careful to maintain a proper distance. You've been reading that book quite often, he observed. It brings me comfort, Zarah admitted. My mother loved Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Said she understood the heart better than most. And do you agree? Griffin asked. I think so, Zarah replied thoughtfully. She writes of love as something transformative, something that changes how we see ourselves and the world. She hesitated, then added softly, something I'm only beginning to understand. Griffin's gaze intensified. Zarah, but whatever he intended to say, was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching riders. Griffin was on his feet instantly, his relaxed demeanor replaced by alertness. Stay here, he instructed, already moving toward the front of the house. Zarah ignored the command, following close behind. Who could it be? Probably nothing to worry about, Griffin said, though his hand moved to the pistol at his hip. But best to be cautious. They reached the front of the house just as 3 riders approached the main gate. From this distance, Zarah couldn't make out their faces, but something about the lead rider's posture sent a chill down her spine. Hank emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, and moved to Griffin's side. Several ranch hands appeared as well, their stances wary. "Get inside, Zarah," Griffin said quietly. "Please." This time Zarah obeyed, retreating to the house but positioning herself at a window where she could observe the approaching men. As they drew closer, she could see they were rough-looking, trail-worn, with the hard eyes of men accustomed to violence. Griffin and Hank stepped forward to meet them, their postures deliberately casual but alert. Zarah couldn't hear the exchange, but she saw Griffin shake his head in response to something the lead rider said. The man gestured expansively, his manner growing aggressive. Griffin's reply was short, his stance unyielding. The tension was palpable even from a distance. Zarah's heart pounded as she recognized the situation for what it was, a confrontation that could turn deadly in an instant. Suddenly, the lead rider pointed toward the house, and Zarah instinctively stepped back from the window. Had they seen her? Did they know who she was? Were these the men who'd killed her father? Through the lace curtain, she saw Griffin's hand move to his pistol, though he didn't draw it. The lead rider seemed to reconsider, glancing at the armed ranch hands who had casually positioned themselves within firing range. After a tense moment, he spat on the ground, yanked his horse around, and led his companions away from the ranch. Zarah sagged against the wall, relief making her knees weak. When Griffin entered the house minutes later, his expression was grim. Who were they? She asked, though she feared she already knew. "Trouble," Griffin replied tersely. "They claimed to be looking for work, but they were asking too many questions about who was staying at the ranch." He met her eyes directly. One of them mentioned a young woman who might have witnessed a regrettable incident near Lawrence, said there was a reward for information about her whereabouts. Zarah's blood ran cold. "They're looking for me." "Yes," Griffin confirmed, "but they don't know you're here. I told them I run a cattle operation, not a boarding house, and that the only women on the property are my housekeeper and her niece, recently arrived from back east." "Your quick thinking may have saved my life," Zarah murmured. Griffin's expression was fierce. "No one will harm you while I have breath in my body, Zarah. I swear it." The intensity of his declaration stirred something deep within her, a recognition that what she felt for this man went far beyond gratitude. In that moment, with danger still hanging in the air, Zarah acknowledged the truth she'd been circling for weeks. "Griffin," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm listening." "I've been thinking about what you said about staying at Willow Creek, about sharing your life." Zarah took a deep breath. "At first, I wasn't sure if what I felt was real or just gratitude to the man who saved me. But today, when I saw those men threatening you, all I could think was that I couldn't bear to lose you." Griffin's expression softened, hope kindling in his eyes. "What are you saying, Zarah?" "I'm saying that I love you," she replied, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "Not because you rescued me, but because of who you are, your kindness, your strength, your integrity. I love you, Griffin Wade, and if your offer still stands, I want to stay, not as your employee or your guest, but as your wife." For a moment, Griffin stood motionless, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then, with reverent slowness, he closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "This isn't just because of those men." "I've been certain for weeks," Zarah admitted. "I was just afraid to trust my heart after everything that happened." A smile of pure joy transformed Griffin's face. "Zarah Campbell," he said, his voice tender, "I have loved you since the moment I found you on the prairie, though I didn't recognize it then. I will spend every day of my life trying to deserve the gift you're offering me." Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, Griffin leaned down. His lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as Zarah responded, her arms sliding around his neck. In that kiss was a promise of protection, of partnership, of a love that would weather whatever storms came their way. When they finally parted, both breathless, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. I should warn you, he murmured. Once word gets out that we're to be married, there's no telling what those men might do. It could be dangerous. I know, Zarah replied. But I'm tired of letting fear dictate my choices. We'll face whatever comes together. Griffin nodded, his expression resolute. Together. The threat posed by the men searching for Zarah necessitated swift action. After consulting with Reverend Matthews, who occasionally visited isolated ranches to conduct services, Griffin and Zarah were married just 1 week later in a simple ceremony at Willow Creek. Maggie decorated the parlor with wildflowers, and Hank stood as Griffin's witness. Despite the hasty arrangements and the shadow of danger that had precipitated them, the day was filled with genuine joy. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, and Griffin kissed his bride before their small gathering of friends, Zarah felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the trials that had brought her to this moment. That evening, after the celebrations had ended and they were finally alone in what was now their shared bedroom, Griffin took Zarah's hands in his. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a simple gold band set with a small pearl. This was my mother's. I've been carrying it since the day I asked you to consider staying. Zarah's eyes filled with tears as Griffin slipped the ring onto her finger beside the plain gold band they'd used for the ceremony. It's beautiful, she whispered. Not half as beautiful as you, Griffin replied, drawing her into his arms. Mrs. Wade. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through Zarah. She was no longer the frightened young woman fleeing across the prairie with nothing. She was Zarah Wade, wife of Griffin Wade, mistress of Willow Creek Ranch. The transformation seemed miraculous. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other with tender passion, their bodies expressing what words could not fully convey: the depth of their commitment, the intensity of their love, the promise of a shared future. In the weeks that followed, they settled into a new rhythm as a married couple. Zarah took on the role of mistress of Willow Creek with quiet confidence, managing the household while Griffin oversaw the ranch operations. Together, they began planning the house Griffin had envisioned by the creek, a home built to last generations. The threat of the men seeking Zarah remained, but as summer progressed with no sign of their return, the newlyweds began to hope that perhaps the danger had passed. Griffin maintained extra vigilance nonetheless, never allowing Zarah to venture far from the ranch alone and ensuring that someone was always within calling distance. In late July, as the heat of summer lay heavy on the prairie, Griffin announced that he needed to make another trip to Lawrence for supplies and to handle some banking matters. I don't like leaving you, he told Zarah as they lay together in the pre-dawn darkness, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. I'll be fine, she assured him. Hank and the others will be here, and I'm not helpless, you know, you've been teaching me to shoot. Griffin chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. And you're a quick study, still be vigilant while I'm gone. I will, Zarah promised. How long will you be away? 2 days at most, Griffin replied. I'll ride hard to get back to you as quickly as possible. Zarah turned in his arms, meeting his gaze in the dim light. I'll be counting the hours. Griffin's departure left a hollow feeling in Zarah's chest, but she busied herself with household tasks, determined not to give in to worry. By mid-morning, she was helping Maggie preserve the summer berries they'd gathered when Hank appeared at the kitchen door, his expression troubled. Mrs. Wade, he said, the formal address still new enough to give Zarah a momentary start. There's a rider approaching. Not Griffin. Zarah's hands stilled in their work. One of the men from before, can't tell yet, Hank replied, but I thought you should know. Thank you, Hank. Zarah wiped her hands on her apron. I'll stay inside until we know who it is. Hank nodded approvingly. I've got the boys keeping watch. We won't let anyone near the house who doesn't belong. As Hank returned to his post, Zarah moved to the front window, peering out cautiously. The approaching rider was still distant, a solitary figure against the vast prairie. Something about the way he sat his horse seemed familiar, but Zarah couldn't place it. Who do you think it is? Maggie asked, joining her at the window. I'm not sure, Zarah replied, but Hank is worried. They watched in tense silence as the rider drew closer. When he was about 100 yards from the main gate, Zarah gasped in recognition. "I know him," she said, disbelieving. "That's Thomas Reed. He was our neighbor back home, one of my father's friends." Without waiting for Maggie's response, Zarah hurried to the door, relief flooding through her at the sight of a familiar face from her past. Hank moved to intercept her as she stepped onto the porch. "Mrs. Wade, please stay inside until we're certain." "It's all right, Hank," Zarah interrupted. "I know this man. He was a friend of my father's." Hank looked unconvinced but stepped aside, his hand remaining near his pistol as Zarah moved forward to greet the visitor. Thomas Reed reined in his horse at the gate, his weathered face breaking into a smile of recognition. "Zarah Campbell." "Is that really you, girl? We thought you were dead, Mr. Reed," Zarah called, hurrying toward him. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" Reed dismounted, removing his hat respectfully. "Been searching for you for months, child, after what happened to your father." He shook his head sadly. "We found the farm burned, no sign of you. Some feared the worst, but I remembered how Daniel always said you had your mother's spirit. Figured if anyone could survive, it'd be you. Please come inside," Zarah invited, gesturing toward the house. "You must be exhausted from your journey." As Reed tied his horse to the hitching post, Zarah introduced him to Hank and Maggie. "Mr. Reed was our closest neighbor," she explained. "His farm bordered ours to the east." Reed followed Zarah into the house, his eyes taking in the comfortable surroundings with evident surprise. "You've landed on your feet, it seems," he observed. "Last place I expected to find Daniel Campbell's daughter was on a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere." There was something in his tone that gave Zarah pause, a note that didn't quite match her memories of the kindly neighbor who'd sometimes brought extra vegetables from his garden or helped her father with the heavy work of harvest. "Life takes unexpected turns," she replied carefully. "I'm married now. This is my husband's ranch." "Married," Reed repeated, his bushy eyebrows rising. "That was quick work." Discomfort prickled along Zarah's spine. "Mr. Reed, how exactly did you find me? Willow Creek is quite isolated." Reed settled into the chair she offered, accepting a cup of coffee from Maggie with a nod of thanks. "Wasn't easy," he admitted. "But word gets around. Heard tell of a young woman matching your description who'd taken up with a rancher out this way." He sipped his coffee. "Must say, I'm relieved to find you well. There are those back home who will want to know what you saw the night your father died." The implied question hung in the air between them. Zarah studied Thomas Reed's face, noting details she hadn't registered at first: the hard set of his mouth, the calculating look in his eyes that didn't match her memories of him. "I didn't see much," she said carefully. "I was hiding." Reed nodded slowly. "Wise of you, those were dangerous men." He leaned forward. "But surely you heard something. Voices, perhaps, names." Alarm bells rang in Zarah's mind. Why was Reed so interested in what she might have heard? And how had he really found her? Griffin's warning about the men asking questions echoed in her thoughts. "It was dark," Zarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Everything happened so quickly, I was frightened." Reed's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "That's a shame. Your testimony could bring your father's killers to justice." "Justice," Zarah repeated softly. "Is that what you want, Mr. Reed?" "Of course," he replied, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a momentary hesitation that confirmed Zarah's growing suspicion. This was not the Thomas Reed she had known, or perhaps she had never truly known him at all. "Maggie," Zarah said, not taking her eyes from Reed, "would you please ask Hank to come inside? I believe he had a question about the north pasture he wanted to discuss with Mr. Reed." Maggie, bless her, seemed to sense the tension in the room. "Of course, Mrs. Wade," she replied, hurrying out. Left alone with Reed, Zarah maintained her composure with effort. "Mr. Reed, I must ask you directly, why have you really come looking for me?" Reed's friendly facade dropped away, his expression turning calculating. "You always were a smart girl, Zarah. Too smart for your own good, just like your father." He set down his coffee cup. "There are men who would pay handsomely to know what you saw and heard that night. Men like the ones who killed my father?" Zarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reed shrugged. "Politics makes for strange bedfellows. Your father chose his side, I chose mine." "You were there," Zarah realized, horror dawning. "That night I heard your voice." You couldn't have, Reed denied, but his eyes narrowed dangerously. You just said you didn't see or hear anything clearly. I lied, Zarah replied, rising to her feet. Just as you're lying now, I recognized your voice that night, but I couldn't believe a neighbor would participate in such violence. Now I understand why you've tracked me down. You're afraid I'll identify you. Reed stood as well, his hand moving toward his coat where Zarah suspected he carried a weapon. You always were too clever for a woman. It's a shame, really. I'd hoped to handle this quietly. Before Reed could draw whatever weapon he concealed, the front door opened, and Hank entered, followed by two ranch hands. Their casual postures didn't disguise their readiness, their hands hovering near their sidearms. Everything all right, Mrs. Wade? Hank asked, his gaze fixed on Reed. No, Hank, it isn't, Zarah replied calmly. Mr. Reed is not the friend of my father's that I believed him to be. In fact, I believe he was involved in my father's murder. Reed's face contorted with rage. You little fool, you think these cowboys can protect you. The men I ride with won't stop until you're silenced. That sounds remarkably like a confession and a threat, Mr. Reed, came a new voice from the doorway. Zarah's heart leaped at the sound. Griffin stood in the entrance, his expression cold as he regarded Reed. Behind him stood Sheriff Tanner from Lawrence, a man Zarah had met during her first trip to town as Mrs. Wade. Griffin, she breathed, relief washing over her. You're back early. Fortunate timing, Griffin replied, his eyes never leaving Reed. Sheriff Tanner and I were on our way back from Lawrence when we spotted an unfamiliar rider heading toward Willow Creek. Given recent events, we thought it prudent to investigate. Reed's eyes darted between Griffin and the sheriff, calculating his options. This is a misunderstanding, he began. I'm an old friend of the family, save it for the judge, Sheriff Tanner interrupted, stepping forward. We've been looking for the men responsible for the Campbell murder for months. Thanks to your own words, we now have our first suspect. As the sheriff moved to disarm and restrain Reed, the would-be assassin made a desperate lunge toward Zarah. Griffin was faster, stepping between them and delivering a powerful blow that sent Reed crashing to the floor. That, Griffin said with cold precision, was for threatening my wife. In the aftermath of Reed's arrest, the full story emerged. Thomas Reed had indeed been part of the group that murdered Daniel Campbell, a gang of border ruffians determined to drive free staters from Kansas territory. When rumors reached them that Zarah might have survived and witnessed the attack, Reed had volunteered to find her, using his connection as a neighbor to gain her trust before silencing her permanently. He'll hang for murder, Sheriff Tanner assured Griffin and Zarah as he prepared to transport Reed back to Lawrence for trial. And with his testimony, we'll likely round up the rest of his gang. Will Zarah need to testify? Griffin asked, his arm protectively around his wife's shoulders. Eventually, the sheriff confirmed, but not until we've got the others in custody. I won't risk her safety. After the sheriff departed with his prisoner, Griffin held Zarah close, his relief palpable. When I saw Reed's horse outside, I feared the worst, he confessed. If anything had happened to you, but it didn't, Zarah reminded him, drawing strength from his embrace. You arrived just in time, as you always seem to do. Griffin smiled down at her. I told you once that I would protect you with everything I have. That's a promise I intend to keep for the rest of our lives. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Zarah realized that a chapter of her life had closed. The men who had murdered her father would face justice. The fear that had driven her across the prairie was finally beginning to recede. What are you thinking? Griffin asked, his fingers gently stroking her hair. That I'm finally free, Zarah replied softly, free to look forward instead of always looking over my shoulder. Griffin pressed a kiss to her forehead. And what do you see when you look forward, Mrs. Wade? Zarah smiled in the darkness. Our home by the creek, children playing under the cottonwood tree, years of building something meaningful together. She turned to face him. A life I never dared to dream of when I fled across the prairie with nothing. I promised you forever that day, Griffin reminded her, and I meant it. I know, Zarah whispered, snuggling closer to the man who had become her heart's home, and forever is just beginning. As summer gave way to autumn, life at Willow Creek settled into a new rhythm. The threat that had shadowed Zarah for so long diminished with each passing day. Thomas Reed's trial resulted in a swift conviction, and his testimony led to the capture of 3 more members of the gang responsible for Daniel Campbell's murder. Zarah did eventually testify, Griffin steadfast at her side during the difficult ordeal. Standing in the Lawrence courthouse, facing the men who had destroyed her first life, Zarah found a strength she hadn't known. She possessed a strength born not just of survival, but of the love and security she'd found with Griffin. With the legal proceedings concluded and justice served, Zarah and Griffin turned their attention fully to the future. Construction began on their new home by the creek, a sturdy 2-story house designed to welcome the family they hoped to create together. "It's perfect," Zarah declared one crisp October afternoon as they stood on the partially finished front porch, surveying the progress. The framework was complete, the roof in place, though the interior remained to be finished. "Not yet," Griffin replied, slipping an arm around her waist. "But it will be, just in time for spring." There was something in his tone that made Zarah look up at him curiously. "Why spring particularly?" Griffin's smile was tender as he placed a gentle hand on her abdomen. "Because by then we'll need the extra room." Zarah's eyes widened. "How did you know? I only began to suspect myself a few days ago." "You've been tired," Griffin said, his expression softening with love. "And you turned pale at the smell of coffee yesterday morning. My mother always said those were the first signs." Joy bubbled up within Zarah, spilling over in a delighted laugh. "I was going to tell you tonight. I wanted to be certain." Griffin gathered her close, his embrace gentle as if she were made of precious glass. "Are you happy about it?" "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zarah assured him, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "When I ran from my burning home that night, I thought I'd lost everything: my family, my future, my very self. I never imagined that fleeing across the prairie would lead me to the greatest happiness of my life." Griffin's kiss was tender, reverent. "From the moment I saw you standing alone on the prairie, something in me knew you were my destiny." Zarah Wade. "Everything that's happened since has only confirmed what my heart recognized instantly." As they stood together in the golden afternoon light, the new house rising around them, the promise of new life growing within Zarah, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From terror and loss to love and creation, from a woman with nothing to a woman with everything that truly mattered. The following spring, as wildflowers once again carpeted the prairie in vibrant color, Zarah gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth Wade. Grace for the blessing she represented. Elizabeth for the poet whose words had spoken to Zarah's heart during her darkest days. The new house by the creek was finished just in time, as Griffin had promised. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, warming the nursery where Zarah rocked their infant daughter, singing softly the lullabies her own mother had once sung to her. Griffin found them there, pausing in the doorway to watch his wife and daughter with undisguised adoration. "The 2 most beautiful women in Kansas territory," he declared. Zarah smiled up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. "She has your eyes," she observed, glancing down at their sleeping daughter. "And your spirit," Griffin replied, crossing the room to kneel beside the rocking chair. He brushed a gentle finger across Grace's downy head. "Strong and resilient, just like her mother." "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" Zarah asked softly. "If you hadn't been riding that particular stretch of prairie that day." "I don't believe it was chance," Griffin said with quiet conviction. "I believe we were meant to find each other across all that emptiness." He took her free hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And I thank God every day that I was there to make you that promise." "Forever," Zarah murmured, remembering his words that day on the prairie. "Forever," Griffin confirmed, his eyes shining with a love that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. "And we're just getting started." As the years passed, Willow Creek Ranch prospered under Griffin and Zarah's stewardship. Their family grew with the birth of a son, Daniel Griffin, named for the grandfather he would never meet but whose legacy of courage and principle would shape his upbringing. A second daughter, Hope, completed their family 3 years later. The house by the creek became everything they had envisioned: a home filled with laughter, learning, and love. Zarah established a small school for their children and those of the neighboring ranches, fulfilling her long-held dream of teaching. Griffin expanded the ranch operations, breeding horses as well as cattle, his reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spreading throughout the territory. Kansas entered the Union as a free state in 1861, a triumph of the principles Daniel Campbell had died defending. When the Civil War erupted that same year, Griffin and Zarah opened their home to refugees fleeing the violence along the Missouri border, continuing the work of justice and compassion that had brought them together. Through it all, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, they remained each other's steadfast partners, their love deepening with each passing season. The promise made on the prairie became the foundation of a life built with purpose and devotion, a testament to the power of love to transform even the darkest circumstances into something beautiful. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Griffin surprised Zarah with a special gift, a silver locket to replace the simple gold one that had been her mother's, the only possession she'd managed to save from her burning home. "Open it," he urged as they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. Inside the locket, Zarah found a miniature portrait of their family on one side. On the other was engraved a line from Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poetry. "I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach." Tears filled Zarah's eyes as she closed the locket and pressed it to her heart. "It's perfect," she whispered. Griffin's smile was tender as he took her hand, the same strong, gentle hand that had lifted her onto his horse when she had nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of fear. 20 years ago, I found a remarkable woman standing alone on the prairie," he said softly. "I offered her forever, never fully understanding what a gift I was being given in return." "We gave each other forever," Zarah corrected, leaning against his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "And every day I thank God that you rode beside me when I needed you most." As twilight deepened into night, they remained together on the porch, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in a rhythm established 2 decades earlier when a desperate flight across the prairie led to an unexpected encounter that changed everything. Behind them, the lights of their home glowed warm and inviting, a beacon in the vastness of the prairie. Within those walls, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge of their parents' unwavering love. And before them stretched the land they had tamed together, the life they had built from nothing but courage, hard work, and a promise of forever that had proven more valuable than all the gold in California. It was, Zarah reflected as she gazed up at the stars that had witnessed both her greatest sorrow and her greatest joy, exactly the life she was meant to live, with exactly the man she was meant to love. From the ashes of tragedy had risen something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and its capacity for renewal. "Forever," she murmured, echoing the word that had changed her life on that fateful day so long ago. Griffin's arm tightened around her shoulders, his reply a vow renewed with each passing day. "Forever, my love, forever."